It was supposed to be just another routine flight, but what happened in first class would leave everyone on board speechless. Passengers were settling into their seats, flight attendants moving through the cabin with practiced smiles, when an unexpected confrontation erupted that no one saw coming. At the center of it was James Carter, a highly respected elderly black CEO, known not just for his business success, but for his calm and dignified presence. What happened next challenged everything people thought they knew about civility in the air. A young flight attendant, flustered and impatient, made a comment that immediately turned heads. Her words, sharp and condescending, weren't just rude, they crossed a line. The cabin went quiet, the tension palpable. James, usually composed and unshakable, froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as the insult sank in. But before anyone could predict his response, something else happened. His twin children, who were seated nearby, reacted in a way that stunned everyone. Whispers spread down the aisle. Passengers exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. The twins' reaction was so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that it left both the flight crew and the other passengers completely off guard. People leaned forward, hearts racing, trying to understand what would come next. The tension in the cabin didn't ease. James Carter sat upright, his hands resting calmly on the armrests, but his eyes told a story of quiet fury. The flight attendant, now aware that she had crossed an invisible line, shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her colleagues for backup, but none of them spoke. The twins, identical in appearance but with contrasting personalities, exchanged a subtle look, a signal only they seemed to understand. It was clear they were about to act, but the cabin remained on edge, each passenger holding their breath. A few rows back, other travelers tried to pretend they weren't watching, but curiosity was impossible to resist. People began whispering, speculating about the CEO's career, his reputation, and why he seemed so calm in the face of such blatant disrespect. Some recognized him instantly, murmuring about his achievements and philanthropy, while others simply sensed the gravity of the moment. James had spent decades building businesses from the ground up, breaking barriers that many thought impossible, and yet here, thousands of feet above the ground, a small act of rudeness threatened to shatter the peace. The twins were quiet, but their body language spoke volumes. One leaned forward slightly, fingers tapping lightly against the tray table, eyes fixed on the flight attendant, while the other remained motionless, a silent anchor of calm and confidence. The flight attendant, sensing the growing intensity, hesitated, her previous arrogance replaced with uncertainty. Passengers felt the suspense deepen, wondering would James respond? Would the twins intervene? And how far could this confrontation go before it spiraled out of control in the confined space of the airplane cabin? The cabin had transformed from ordinary to charged. Every small sound amplified, the soft hum of the engines, the rustle of bags, the murmur of passengers. James Carter's presence commanded attention without a word. Some travelers stole glances at his crisp suit and the calm authority he exuded, trying to reconcile the image of a powerful CEO with the current situation unfolding midair. The flight attendant, meanwhile, fumbled with her clipboard, trying to regain composure. But it was clear the balance of power in the cabin had shifted. The twins' subtle signals had not gone unnoticed. One of them, a sharp-minded young woman named Maya, leaned closer to James, whispering something that made him nod slightly. Her brother Marcus stayed rigid, his gaze fixed on the flight attendant. Together, they seemed to form an unspoken strategy, a silent front that added a new layer of suspense. Other passengers began to notice the dynamic, their curiosity growing into unease. Who were these twins, and why did their presence feel like it could tip the entire situation? From the perspective of the flight attendant, panic was creeping in. She had handled difficult passengers before, but nothing like this. Her earlier confidence replaced by doubt. She considered calling for a supervisor, yet the twins' poised, unflinching demeanor made her hesitate. Every passenger was now a witness, and the thought of the confrontation escalating made a few people instinctively reach for their phones. Even the crew in the back of the plane were whispering among themselves, unsure how to handle a scenario that seemed to defy the usual protocol. James Carter remained silent, the twins alert and poised, and the flight attendant visibly shaken, leaving the tension in the cabin thick enough to almost touch. The question hung in the air. Who would make the first move, and how far would this confrontation go before someone finally broke? The tension in the cabin had reached a boiling point. Every movement seemed magnified. The flight attendant's shallow breaths, the faint shuffle of passengers trying to look busy, the twins' steady, unblinking stares. James Carter's silence was deafening. It carried more weight than any words could. His calm exterior made the air around him feel charged, like a storm that hadn't yet broken. People instinctively leaned forward, drawn to the drama unfolding, as though the flight itself had become a stage for something far bigger than an ordinary dispute. Maya and Marcus, the twins, exchanged another subtle glance, a silent agreement passing between them. The flight attendant's earlier arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by a growing sense of dread. She adjusted her stance, her hands clutching the edge of a service cart, as if to steady herself. But it did little to mask the unease radiating from her. Passengers whispered, some cautiously, others audibly, speculating on what might happen next. The cabin was on edge, caught between curiosity, fear, and anticipation from another angle. A few passengers who had recognized James Carter began to murmur his accolades quietly, reinforcing his authority in the room. The contrast between his decades of leadership experience and the flight attendant's momentary lapse of judgment only intensified the suspense. The twins' poised readiness, their coordinated but unspoken plan, suggested that something decisive was about to occur. Every second stretched, the hum of the engines became a background drum to the silent standoff. Eyes darted between James, the twins, and the flight attendant. The tension had reached its peak the moment before the storm. One wrong word, one misstep, and everything could erupt, leaving the entire flight in chaos. Everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one knew how, or who would take the first move. Just as the cabin seemed frozen in that tense standoff, an unexpected sound cut through the silence, a sharp ping from one of the passengers' phones. Everyone instinctively turned, and for a brief second, the focus shifted. The flight attendant's eyes flicked toward the source, and in that instant, a new layer of tension entered the cabin. The twins' calm expressions hardened slightly, as if they had been anticipating something even more complicated. Then came the second shock. A fellow passenger, seated a few rows behind, recognized James Carter and quietly muttered that he had once been involved in a major corporate scandal, an event that had long since been cleared, but still carried whispers of controversy. The words spread like wildfire, and suddenly, the situation was no longer just about the insult. Now, the flight attendant's earlier disrespect collided with public perception, reputation, and the unseen judgments of every passenger watching. The air thickened, heavier than before, charged with fear, curiosity, and the potential for chaos. Maya's eyes darted briefly toward the emergency exit, a signal to Marcus that escalated their silent communication. They were not just reacting, they were preparing for something, a move that could completely change the outcome. The flight attendant, noticing the subtle but unmistakable shift, faltered. Confidence gave way to panic. Every passenger felt it, a collective realization that the tension was no longer about a single insult but about how far this confrontation could spiral. Even the flight crew stiffened, uncertain how to intervene without making matters worse. The stakes were higher than anyone could have predicted. The insult, the twins' poised reactions, and the whispered scandal all collided in a moment of suspense that felt like it could explode at any second. And just as everyone braced for the next move, a startling action from the twins left the cabin completely breathless, hinting at a confrontation no one would forget. The cabin fell into a tense silence as the twins finally acted. Maya rose slowly, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the hum of nervous whispers. "Excuse me," she said, "but I think it's important to address what just happened." All eyes turned toward her, including the flight attendant, who now looked uncertain, cornered by the twins' unshakable composure. Marcus stood beside his sister, his presence a quiet but unmistakable force, amplifying the authority that James carried effortlessly. James finally spoke, his tone controlled but commanding. "Respect isn't earned by position or it's shown by basic decency." The words landed in the cabin like a hammer. The flight attendant's face flushed, and she stammered, realizing how publicly she had overstepped. James' calmness and the twins' poised intervention left no room for argument. The entire cabin seemed to exhale collectively, the tension breaking just enough to allow clarity to settle. Passengers began to murmur in approval, impressed by the quiet dignity and teamwork that had turned a moment of calm flee